Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to the World Over Live. A happy Advent to our domestic and international audience. Thanks for joining us, and you'll be glad you did. They're fighting over tax hikes and spending cuts here in the nation's capital as workers in Michigan were granted the right to opt out of union membership. To explore these stories and a few others from the week is Father Robert SIRICO of the Acton Institute. He's also written a new book, A Field Guide to the Hero's Journey. What's that all about? It offers some practical advice to entrepreneurs. And later, is there really a war on Christmas? Some say no. We'll see what Catholic League President Bill Donohue has to say. My guess is plenty. And finally, Stephen GREYDANUS returns to talk about the big Christmas movies. We will take an in-depth look at Les Miserables, the highly anticipated musical screen adaptation. The film's star, HUGH JACKMAN, and director Tom Hooper join me for exclusive interviews. Now, is that a show or is that a show? As always, I want you to be part of the program. Get your calls in now. The number, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Budget talks in Washington appear to have stalled in spite of the looming fiscal cliff at the beginning of the new year. Without a deal, $1.2 trillion in automatic federal spending cuts kick in, and the Bush-era tax cuts expire, calculated at more than $800 billion over the next 10 years. GOP House Speaker John Boehner said that there are serious differences that remain between he and President Obama. Republicans are not budging on their refusal to increase tax rates, and Democrats are balking at any entitlement reform, even though the president had previously indicated support for modest adjustments to Social Security and Medicare schedules. On Wednesday, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke weighed in, saying the uncertainty of a budget deal is adversely affecting consumer and business confidence and leading businesses to cut back on investment. More on this later in the show. Also looming in the new year, on both sides of the Atlantic, major decisions on the legal definition of marriage. This past week, the U.S. Supreme Court said it will consider two cases regarding laws defining marriage as a union between one man and one woman. California's voter-approved Proposition 8 and the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. Arguments are, and the eventual rulings are expected in June. And the British government announced Tuesday that it will introduce legislation in the new year legalizing same-sex marriage. Prime Minister David Cameron telegraphed the move during a television interview. Equalities Minister Maria Miller addressed the House of Commons this week.
Who wish to conduct For me, extending marriage to same-sex couples will strengthen, not weaken, this vital institution. And the response I'm publishing today makes clear that we will enable same-sex couples to get married through a civil ceremony. For some, this is contentious.
The bishops of England and Wales were quick to announce their opposition to the plan. They accused the government of taking, they accused the government for taking action with no electoral mandate, while ignoring the 600,000 signatories of a petition defending traditional marriage. According to Miller, the legislation will protect religious institutions from being compelled to conduct gay marriages and explicitly prohibits the Church of England from conducting such ceremonies. A deepening crisis for the church in China. The communist regime has suspended Catholic Bishop Thaddeus Ma Daquin and revoked his appointment as coadjutor of Shanghai. The government has also stripped him of his title as bishop. The punishment comes after Bishop Ma quit the government-run Catholic Patriotic Association during his ordination mass in July. His ordination had both the approval of the Vatican and the Chinese government. After the ordination, Chinese authorities pulled the bishop from public ministry, and he has been on retreat ever since. Several Vatican officials have reaffirmed the Church's support of Bishop Ma and have condemned the Chinese government for its actions. Pope Benedict XVI made his much-anticipated Twitter debut on Wednesday. At the conclusion of his weekly general audience, the Holy Father entered the Twitterverse with the following tweet. "Dear friends, I am pleased to get in touch with you through Twitter. Thank you for your generous response. I bless all of you from my heart." The message was transmitted simultaneously in English, Italian, Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, Polish, and Arabic. Church officials warned that the papal tweets aren't to be considered infallible teachings, but merely pearls of wisdom from the Pope's own words. Pope Benedict already has more than 1 million Twitter followers. You can follow him at Pontifex. And back here in the U.S., Bishop Kevin Vann, formerly of Fort Worth, Texas, was installed as the new Bishop of Orange. The Southern California diocese is the 10th largest in the U.S., home to 1.3 million Catholics. During his installation Mass on Monday, Bishop Vann urged the faithful to help build up the Church and to shape the culture, not be shaped by it. He replaces retiring Bishop Todd Brown. We wish Bishop Vann all the best. And finally, will it all end next Friday as predicted by that Mayan calendar? Some people apparently think so, even though Jesus himself said, "No man shall know the day or the hour of the apocalypse." The Vatican's priestly astronomers assure us that the Earth has 3 to 4 billion years left before it's swallowed up by the sun. So what to tell those who are worried about a December 21st apocalypse? Chilean Bishop Bernardo Bastres Florence has an idea. He's telling those who think the end is near to be sure to name the Church as the beneficiary of their possessions in their wills. Bishop Bastres promised that after December 21st, he will eternally pray for them. I guess that's one way of dealing with it. Up next, Father Robert SIRICO joins us to talk about the latest news of the week, and he'll tell us what it takes to be an entrepreneurial hero. The advice you won't want to miss. Stay tuned. The World Over Live is straight ahead.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
My next guest is the president of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. He's a regular World Over contributor here, and he appears for the last time in 2012. He's also the co-author of the recent book, A Field Guide for the Hero's Journey, Inspirational Classics and Practical Advice from a Serial Entrepreneur and an Entrepreneurial Priest. Boy, that's a mouthful. Father Robert SIRICO, welcome to the show again.
Well, I hope we'll be back in 2013
well,
if
that's
the world
right.
continues.
You've only got a couple of weeks, so you're okay. I think you're okay.
I think so.
Now, we saw this right-to-work bill in Michigan.
Wow.
What it allows is people to have the freedom to join a union or not. What's wrong with this? Why the response we've been hearing from Catholic quarters? And we'll get into that in a moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Church's teaching has been in favor of unions, especially in contexts where people are being abused and the like.
Right.
And there's a long left-wing tradition to use the Church's teaching to articulate this vision. So when you come to Michigan, which was the kind of stronghold of unionism historically in the United States, and to have a right-to-work bill, which generally is considered something that goes on in the South, it makes for a kind of explosive mix. And that's exactly what's happened this week in Michigan.
Bishop Gumbleton has written an extensive piece, Bishop Thomas Gumbleton, and the auxiliary, retired auxiliary in Michigan.
Yes.
He wrote this piece this week, and he says this devastates economic justice and it violates everything Catholics believe. What's wrong with you, Father Robert SIRICO?
Well, I dissent from Bishop Gumbleton. I think that editorial that he wrote was jam-packed with platitudes. There's not an argument in it. In point of fact, where economists say where we've had right-to-work legislation, the economy has blossomed. You have more and more union members choosing not to be members of unions. So you have a growing workforce of people whose needs are being met. And I think that, with the technology, with just the advance of the economy as a whole, has really rendered unions relatively obsolete. And I don't think they've kept up with what's gone on in terms of the economy. They haven't been competitive.
If you have a question for Father Robert Sirico, you see the number there, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. And we already had a bunch of emails.
Yeah, I'm sure. This is very controversial.
Concerned about this issue.
Yeah, and confused.
Yeah, and I want to quote something. This is Pope John Paul II, Blessed John Paul II, in Laborum Exercens.
Exercens, yes.
Exercens. You're so much better at pronouncing that than I. He says, unions do not have the character of political parties struggling for power. They should not be subjected to the decision of political parties or have too close links to them. Is that what's driving this reform, if you will, of union membership and unions?
Well, certainly a lot of this, because you have among people who are members of unions the fact that they have part of their union dues goes to political, various political
and some people who aren't members of the union, I mean, if there are certain industries that you must be a member of the union to
or at least pay
there.
the union dues for it. And I was just talking to somebody whose relative was a member of the teachers union, and she opted out because of her pro-life stance and the unions being pro-choice, pro-abortion. And she was ostracized in the school. She finally gave in and said, well, for whatever amount of money is, I'll just concede that. So, I mean, if you've seen any of the reports, there's a lot of aggression, a lot of anger about this issue coming from the union side. And I think when you look to the people themselves, the workers themselves, who knows better than the workers themselves what's going to benefit them and their families? And they're choosing to opt out of unions, and this is one of the reasons for it.
Let's talk for a moment about this fiscal cliff, and this has dominated the coverage here in Washington, D.C. Most people do not understand what the fiscal cliff is, what it means, and the reportage on it, all people say is fiscal cliff. They don't ever unpack what it means. So we're told there's a stalemate, but I want to dig in a little bit. First of all, how dire is the fiscal cliff, and if we pass it? And then I'll tell you in a moment what it is.
Well, I mean, okay, what it is an agreement to certain cuts. And in certain areas, the cuts are going to be rather dramatic, particularly in the military. But in other areas, there will be certain percentages. To a very large extent, they're simply not the raises that are kind of planned.
So they're cutting back the rate of growth.
The rate of growth rather than the
cutting
actual.
Into it.
Yeah. And if we are ever going to, remember that the whole reason for setting up the fiscal cliff and the sequestering was to incentivize the Congress to vote on dealing with the deficit.
Right.
And if we're going to just let the deficit go, I mean, if you look at the president's proposals, it does really nothing to deal with the deficit. In fact, adds to the deficit. So if you want to see an economic disaster, don't deal with the deficit, and you will see worse than a cliff.
Okay, I want to give people a sense of what this is. What it means is 10% cuts in the military, 2% cuts to Medicare, 7 to 8% cut in education, totaling $1.2 trillion in cuts, sequester. That's automatic cuts if Congress does nothing.
And what's the deficit?
We have a $16 trillion deficit.
Okay.
So that doesn't make a dent.
That's about 10%, something like that.
But they're rending their garments now, saying this is too extreme, this is too much.
I think it's highly rhetorical. I think they're, kind of ramping up the emotions. It really kind of plays into this whole Mayan prophecy of the end of the world, doesn't it? You kind of have the end of the year, and now the end of the world.
So maybe December 21st is the end of the congressional world, not our world. Just Congress.
Yeah.
Look at these poll numbers. A moment ago, you mentioned the president.
Yeah.
And
this is the thing.
You said the president won't move. He doesn't want to cut any of these programs. In fact, he's adding to it. The president seems to be acting in conformity with the will of the people. Yeah. Pew poll just released today. The hard medicine, here you go. Gradually raise Social Security retirement age. Only 42% approve, 56% disapprove.
Right.
Gradually raise Medicare retirement age, 56%, disapprove. Help lower income to help lower income Americans, 58%, disapprove those cuts. Roads and transportation cuts, 67%, disapprove. They don't want to cut anything.
You're agreeing with Sybil here, because out of the other side of Sybil's mouth comes all the things that they want. They want all of these goodies. They want none of the. They don't want their taxes raised. They want all of these things, but they don't want to pay for them.
Well, 59% say kill the Bush tax cuts for anybody making $250,000 or more. But the question is, how much revenue do you get out of that slim group of people?
Well, that's the first question. And how much revenue do you decrease the production of by cutting into the capital base of people who have the money to invest? What you're doing is stalling the engine that's going to get us out of this, if we're going to get out of this at all.
2 committees of the Bishops' Conference have suggested that there is a circle of protection around the poor. You should not cut any aid to the poor. And to do so would be immoral. Do you agree with that position or not?
I think it very much depends. It's a prudential decision. You can't pronounce with the Church's authority on a prudential matter. You can say, we think this is what will happen, and so we would encourage not. But good Catholics can disagree with that. This is a matter of economics. The Church doesn't
But you know there are people sitting out there going, look at that heartless Father Robert SIRICO saying we should.
No, but how
we
are
don't
we
have to worry about the poor.
Of course we have to worry about the poor. You know, we must worry about that. That is not the debate here. We need to be in solidarity with the poor. The question is
the government the best instrument of that charity?
You can't give things to people if you don't have the economic framework, the infrastructure to produce things. So I think if you cut into the goose that lays the golden egg, you're not going to have any more golden eggs. It's a matter of prudence. How do we do this? There is no question that we have a solidarity with those who are most in need.
Here's a question, and people are, there are a lot of emails coming in about the union issue.
Yeah, sure.
Father Robert, this question pertains to the state of Michigan, the home base of the Acton Institute.
Yes.
They have a lot of controversy over the recently enacted right-to-work statute. Yes. In all the argumentation, I have not heard about the SCOTUS case, Communication Workers of America versus Beck. Could you explain a bit about the case and the decision of the court? Why is there such little reference to this case in the argumentation of the Michigan law? Do you know that case? I'm not familiar with it.
I'm not familiar with that case. Maybe that's why.
This is the problem.
I will look that up.
We'll look into it and we'll get back to it.
Get right to it.
Here's another one. This Catholic has worked for 34 years in right-to-work states. I've always earned over minimum wage, gotten vacations and holidays. Had health insurance, and on the last job had my choice of 6 chaplains to talk to. Really, this is not 1920.
No, this is true. I mean, people are making their decisions. The economy has progressed. People are meeting, that is, employers are meeting the needs and the demands that are given to them in the workforce. Remember that the competition that goes on in the labor force is not between the worker and the owner of the production, but between workers.
Well, explain to people, as we do have a few emails and they're asking, what is the Church's position vis-a-vis the poor? We have to be in solidarity. We must care for poor people.
Yes.
And so what is the Church teaching? What are these people required to do?
Well, first of all, in emergency situations, the government should intervene where there is a very definite need, but it should be first people responding in their own local communities. Next, organizations who are responding to them. Next, localities closest to those in need. The principle of subsidiarity again. And of course, we have to take out of our superfluity, our abundance, and help people. It's a wonderful time of the year. In fact, we're going to see an incredible amount of giving right in this season, right now. This is the highest density of philanthropic activity going on right now in this period.
Cynical people say, oh, that's because all those rich people want their tax cuts.
Well, they may not get their tax deductions, not tax cuts.
Tax deductions,
because now in the White House, going on with this whole debate, the president is talking about reducing the tax deductibility.
Charitable deduction.
This is a real danger to the church. The Bishops' Conference also came out against that, by the way.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment about the Pope's tweeting this week. This got coverage far and wide, I think primarily because you don't have to know a whole lot to cover it. Hey, the Pope tweets, that's the story.
Yeah, that was the whole story. Of course, this is a follow-up to the conference they had in Rome with 150 bloggers from all over the world.
Right.
It's, you know, an extension of the Church's desire to be involved in the social dialogue that's occurring, especially among young people. That's what the Holy Father said. I think it's going to be great. And I don't know if you've signed up for the
I have.
Pope's
No, I'm
Twitter
following
account.
him. I'm following him. And in fact, I retweeted him a few times this week. And they're, you know, they're kind of little nice takeaway ideas. You read them, and they're little inspirations.
They're beautiful. They're taken
the
from his writings and stuff. I don't think the Holy Father is carrying an iPad with him, you know, wherever he goes. And
I have an email here, and Joan writes, I listen to anti-Catholic rhetoric on the mainstream news media every day. I don't need to hear more anti-Catholic rhetoric when I turn on EWTN. You tell me he does not need to join a union. I have a son who's mentally impaired and he works at a supermarket. You would say what?
That's a wonderful thing. Does he? I didn't catch that.
He's
a member of a union?
Her son is mentally impaired and he works in a supermarket, and I suppose he's joined a union. Well, this gives him the freedom
to do it. That's fine. He has the freedom to do that. That wouldn't stop him from doing that. I think that's great. And I don't know where the anti-Catholicism is here. There's an honest disagreement on policy here. And we should be charitable in the way we talk about the issue. I know this is a very hard issue for a lot of people. It really is. Yeah.
Let's move on to your new book. Tell me about this Field Guide for the Hero's Journey. Yes. Where did this come from, first?
Well, I have to admit my co-author, Jeff Sandifer, who is an entrepreneur in Texas, who's not a Catholic, had this idea, and he said there's really a need for a book that combines inspirational stories and some guidance and in the form of questions. And so we sat down and divided up. He thought it would be fun to have what he calls a serial entrepreneur and an entrepreneurial priest, one who is a Catholic, obviously, and one who isn't, compiling these stories and kind of having this dialogue. And what's nice about it is that it's written in a way it combines stories from our own experience, but also classical stories and speeches that are designed to kind of prime the pump, where a parent could sit down and read it to their children. I'm sure the Arroyo children are going to get lots of readings from this book.
Oh, of course. I'll read it to them every night. Let's talk about how do you get started? There are an awful lot of people out there. They're unhappy in their jobs.
Sure they are.
The economy's terrible, and they're looking for another way. It's a scary time to try to sell entrepreneurism, Father.
One of the reasons that it's a scary time to sell entrepreneurship is precisely that it's a difficult time to have real heroes. Did you ever notice in the movies or even in novels how they rip down the heroic? They always show you the base side of the dark side of the hero. And what we're trying to do is hold up models that inspire people, that encourage people, that say to them, you know, here's a person who did something like what you're having trouble with. Look how he or she surmounted this, and how maybe you could do this. It tries to put some fuel in the tank for people.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about this new rendering of Les Miserables, the musical,
the
film version.
Looking forward to watching it.
And as I hear you talk about this, I think this is just what you're saying. Yeah. It is a heroic story of a Catholic struggling with his own redemption, and it's very powerful. Yes. But we'll get into it later, but it reminds me of this. There are a lot of familiar stories and folks here that are mentioned. Yes. Cardinal Van Thuan, who's someone our audience would certainly know. I interviewed him years ago before his passing.
Yes, he was a good friend of mine, and I tell some of the stories. In fact, the story I tell of when I was at dinner with him in Rome, he never liked to go out. He lived in the area where they have great Italian restaurants, but we'd always have Vietnamese food in his apartment. And I saw the actual journals that he wrote, the diaries. And he told me how difficult it was for him to be in prison and how he didn't want, obviously, to be in prison, and asked God and said, I want to do your work. And he said the Lord impressed upon him that, you know, you have to be.
And how does a cardinal who was imprisoned for 8 years in solitary confinement, I think, right?
13 years, 9 in solitary
9 in solitary confinement. How does that apply to entrepreneurship?
Well, you know, there are times when entrepreneurs find themselves in situations that they don't want to be in. And they have to surmount that. They have to understand that the core of what they are isn't just what they do, it's who they are. And so I thought that's a model of for business people who really want to do well. And who want to do good at the same time.
How do people get started? Isn't that the hardest part here?
I think it is. I think being teachable, having models, having accountability, all of those kinds of things are what we lay out in the book. And you notice at the back there are, of each chapter, there are some questions to get people to think more deeply about it.
I love the idea of searching out people who may know more than you do, choosing your companions wisely.
So it's humility. You know, and the book is written in a language that would be accessible to people who, it's kind of like the Muppets. You know how you'd be able to watch the Muppets with the kids?
Are you saying this is permit endorsed? Is that what you're saying?
I hope so. How the kids will laugh at something and you laugh at something, but you're not quite laughing at the same thing. 2 different reasons, yeah. And the language of this book is written to believers who are explicitly Christian, but also to people who are seeking. And we hope that both audiences will get a lot out of it.
What's the biggest challenge, do you think, facing entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs today, aside from the terrible economic situation and the
Well, this is actually a great opportunity for entrepreneurs. You know, when there are difficulties, this is the exact trait of an entrepreneur. You look around and you discover something that everybody needs right now. What do people need? Now, if I had the answer to that question, I would be out on the market, right? So I think it's that kind of encouragement to remind people that you are more than your circumstances. You can transcend your circumstances.
And throughout the book, why the hero's journey?
Well, Jeff Sandifer, this really inspired Jeff, the notion of heroes, and he has a few heroes in his life, and I suppose he's been a hero to a number of people too.
Very good, Father Robert SIRICO. Thanks so much for being with us again, and Merry Christmas in advance.
Merry blessed Christmas to you and all of the wonderful viewers who I meet everywhere in the world I go. They come up to me and say hello to Raymond. So for those of you who have asked me to do that, I'm saying hello to you.
You know what they tell me? Say hello to Father SIRICO. Father Robert's a field guide for the hero's journey, inspirational classics and practical advice for a serial entrepreneur, from a serial entrepreneur and an entrepreneur priest, is available at bookstores everywhere and online at the usual outlets. For more on Father Robert and the work of the Acton Institute, and you can get the book there, visit acton.org. When we return, is there really a war on Christmas? Bill Donohue of the Catholic League joins us, and later, Hugh Jackman and the director of Les Miserables in exclusive interviews, and Stephen GREYDANUS, the National Catholic Register film critic, and I will tell you which Christmas movies are worth your hard-earned money. The World of Our Life continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. We're midway through Advent and nativity scenes are disappearing. Figures have been snatched in Virginia, Illinois, even in the airport in Manchester, England. Now, some say this is evidence of a war on Christmas. Others say it's nothing of the sort. To give us his take, I recently spoke with Bill Donohue, the president of the Catholic League. Take a look. Let's start with your critics. And they say, from Jon Stewart to a priest I heard the other day on TV, this war on Christmas, it's silly. This is a season of peace and love. Why can't you be more peaceful and loving, Bill Donohue?
Well, you know, we're not the ones who started this. I mean, when you have school principals trying to ban candy canes, not just Silent Night in the schools, when you have people trying to say you're not allowed to have a nativity scene on the same public property that you've had it there for literally for decades, when you have people being harassed in the workplace because they might have a religious symbol on, particularly at Christmas time. It's rather silly, it seems to me, to pretend, or rather delusional, I really should say, to pretend that we don't have a problem. Now, look, I am not saying that all Christians in this country are being persecuted. What I am simply saying is this: there is a determined effort on the part of a minority of activist atheists to punish Christianity, to neuter it under the guise of multiculturalism. And for people not to acknowledge that, then they have to pretend that the examples I gave, and I could give many, many, many more, simply don't exist.
Let's get into some of these specific cases, Bill. There's this Santa Monica Park, and for 60 years they've had a nativity scene. It was erected, it was just statues, and it went on without protest or concern. A few years ago, some atheists said, we want to put our counter presentations up, and they did so. And they put things that said Christmas is a myth, Jesus is a myth, like these other myths, blah, blah, blah. This year, the park said, you know what, we're not going to have anybody put any presentations up, including both the nativity scene as well as the atheists. Your thoughts on this? Why is this part of the war on Christmas, since everybody's being thrown out of the park?
Well, there are two ways the government can be neutral. One is the tolerant way, which is to give all world religions an equal opportunity to display their Christmas symbols on the public square. The other is the intolerant way, which is the favored by the activist atheist, which is to basically be intolerant toward everybody, that nobody gets a chance to display their message in the public square. I prefer the tolerant way. Now, let me just say this. These atheist group, American Atheists, Freedom from Religion Foundation out of Madison, Wisconsin, people say, well, they're just against all religions. That's a myth. They are nominally against all religions. They really go against Christianity, and quite frankly, the bullseye of Christianity is Catholicism. That's why they choose December and not some other month to carry on their war. Now, let me make something very clear here to the listeners, Ray. I have had met many, many atheists in my time. I've studied under them. Because you're an atheist doesn't make you a hater. Paul Kurtz died a month ago. He was the head of the Secular Humanists. He died in his mid-80s. He was not a hater. As a matter of fact, he said he was opposed to what he called the angry atheist, the ones like I'm talking about, the ones who want to shove their atheist agenda down our throats. I studied under Sidney Hook, the great philosopher at New York University. He was an atheist but didn't have an anti-Catholic bone in his body. What I'm talking about is a concerted effort on the part of activists, particularly since 9/11, to basically erase, eradicate, to scrub the public square free of any expression of religion, particularly Christianity. That's where the problem is, right there. And for people to pretend that it doesn't exist, I guess they have a craven need to be liked. I want to be respected, not liked.
Bill, there was an editorial I read the other day, and it said, look, this is about the separation of church and state, and if a government school board or government park officials say, we don't want that display or we don't want that show at our school, it really doesn't limit in any way your ability to celebrate the holiday in any way you see fit. What's wrong with that analysis?
Well, let's just give the example of the two other parts of culture. By the way, the defining element of culture, of course, is religion. There's no question about that. I don't care whether people like it or not. I'm a sociologist. That's always been the defining culture. But let's leave the defining mark. Let's leave aside religion. Let's take two other expressions of culture, music and art. Now, let's say I said, listen, I'm not against music and I'm not against artists. I just think that from now on, we can't have any public expressions. In other words, all concerts have to be in concert halls. No more Central Park and other parks, venues of that sort. You can have art display, but not on the sidewalks outside of parks and things of that nature. They always have to be inside a gallery. People would say, well, you're stifling art, you're stifling music, you're trying to cabin it and to put it within some insular quarters, and therefore you're suffocating the life of it. Well, the same is true with religion. Now, let me just say this. On December the 17th, the Catholic League will put a life-size nativity scene up in Central Park, public property. We do so every year, and Jews put up a menorah, indeed the world's largest menorah. I'm in favor of the display of the menorah. I'm in favor of the nativity scene. That's why we put our own up there. Central Park is an area for artists and musicians and others. I did not ask the city of New York or any other city to put my creche up on the grounds of City Hall. Why? It fairly could be argued that that would indicate a possible tacit endorsement of government, of religion at the seat of government. But if you do it in a public forum, as opposed to outside of City Hall, that argument doesn't work. And by the way, I do not put reindeers and Jack Frost and Santa Claus surrounding my nativity scene, nor do I have to by law. There's an awful lot of ignorance about this in our culture.
Bill, speak for a moment, because you keep reading this again and again. This is the separation of church and state, and that has to be protected. Explain that for people who, A, don't understand the historical roots, where the separation of church and state, the Jeffersonian conception came from, and what it really means today.
Right. We don't have separation of church and society. And with the separation of church and state, the actual language is not in the First Amendment.
Right.
It talks about how Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. Now, Jefferson wrote those words. You cannot have an establishment of religion. I'm sorry, Madison. Madison wrote those words. They asked Madison, what did you mean by that? So it's not a matter of historical speculation. What Madison said was this, that you could not have a national church, such as the Church of England, and you could not have the government give preference of one religion over another. And by the way, it said Congress shall pass no law. Right. There were state churches in Massachusetts until 1833. They didn't go to the length where we've gone today, where somebody discovered a statue of Jesus in the ocean floor off of Key Largo, and the ACLU, like maniacs, like people in the asylum, got so angry that they sued over it. No, we've gone way beyond anything. Don't forget, Jefferson, when he wrote that letter in 1801 to the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut, the day later, he was seen going to church in the Capitol. So the church and state argument doesn't work historically. The only way you make it work is to forget what Madison had to say and the supporters like Jefferson and the other founders, and then try to rework history. It's a reinterpretation and a dishonest one of history.
Yeah, Jefferson's letter referred to the church being protected from the intrusions of government. It was the other way around. That, you know, that's what he was arguing in that letter to the Danbury Baptists. People conveniently forget
they know that too. Right, right. Well, they say that the Constitution has to evolve. What that really means is that we want to reinterpret the Constitution away from what the founders meant, so that we can include the idea of the atheist. That's what this is all about.
Let's talk for a moment about Lincoln Chafee, the governor of Rhode Island, who called his Christmas tree a holiday tree. It's the second year he's done so. What's wrong with that? He says, look, I'm respecting the diversity of my state.
Well, first of all, 96% of the American people celebrate Christmas. And 94% of all the people in the United States of America who identify with a religion are Christian. Whether he likes it or not, our roots are of the Judeo-Christian heritage. That's what defines this country. Now, all I have is a question for Governor Chafee. What holiday is the tree celebrating? And by the way, he really shouldn't use that word holiday, because what it really means is holy day. So I guess we have to walk through this linguistic minefield in order to not offend. I don't know who these people are, by the way, and I mean this sincerely. I'm not being facetious. I've never met anybody who suffers apoplexy because they see a nativity scene or a menorah on public property. I know about the atheist organizations, Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, ACLU, Americans United, but I'm talking about your average sane American. This is all made up. This is the politics of multiculturalism, and it has a purpose. Let's dilute the purpose of Christmas and the December month and what Christians celebrate by bringing in all these faux diversity elements and saying that we might offend somebody.
Final question, Bill. Is the war on Christmas getting better in the sense that you see it expanding and people willing to speak up and display their faith in a more bold way, or are the secularists pushing back that expression?
In the last 3 years, I would say things are getting slightly better. We still have a problem, but I think that the peak is somewhat behind us, and that's because more Americans are fighting back. They are being emboldened by this, and we all know that the Lincoln Chafees are badly outnumbered by most Americans, including most people who are not Christian, by the way, who also celebrate Christmas.
Very good. Bill Donohue, Merry Christmas. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, and Merry Christmas to everyone.
And you can follow the works of Bill Donohue and the Catholic League at catholicleague.org. Well, Christmas is nearly upon us, and so is the latest round of Hollywood blockbusters. Peter Jackson's first installment of The Hobbit opens this December 14th, and Christmas Day brings the highly anticipated film version of the musical Les Miserables. I had a chance to talk with the film's star, Hugh Jackman, and director Tom Hooper about the redemptive and religious themes of the movie. Take a look.
Where is your child?
No life has killed the dream.
One day more.
Is it?
Another day, another destiny.
Hamza?
It's never-ending road to Calvary.
Where's the child, Cosette?
Tell me a moment about the moral. It really is a moral drama, and it plays like a moral drama in a way that somehow the stage show, I mean, I saw it in London, I saw it in New York, I didn't get that from it. That moral center is so strong here in the redemptive nature of this character.
Yes.
Talk to me about that, and did that attract you to this role?
Completely. You know, one thing Tom Hooper did very smartly was go back to the book and really open up areas that you could do on film, like the beginning, that prologue. Watch this man's journey, because Victor Hugo talks of his, not of a transformation for Jean Valjean, but he calls it transfiguration, which has a kind of spiritual overtone to it, in that he's changed not only from the prisoner to the mayor and becomes a good guy. Inside, his heart is completely opened up. He's completely changed, and he's closer to God in every way. And I've always loved the last line of the musical.
I was just about to mention that. I've never heard it for some reason. I don't know
I
why.
don't think I have either, but to love another person is to see the face of God. And it's so true. It's probably the example of Jesus in the Bible too. His life was not chronicled by going to churches or synagogues. It was about being with people, or everyone. And that's sort of what Victor Hugo is talking about. And to me, it's one of the most exciting things about this.
Throughout this film, visually, Jean Valjean seems afflicted, if you will, by crosses. Every time he turns around, he's haunted by a cross. Why that decision? And I'm sure it was a deliberate one.
I think the religious subtext of the book Les Miserables, on which the musical's based, is very strong, and his journey is in many senses a spiritual one. He goes from being brutalized as a convict, having spent 19 years doing hard labor, and he finds, through meeting the bishop character played by Colin Wilkinson, he finds contact with God, and through that, most importantly, he finds the importance of being compassionate to your fellow human being.
Can I condemn this man to slavery? Pretend I do not feel his agony. This innocent who bears my face, who goes to judgment in my place, who am I? Can I conceal myself forevermore? Pretend I'm not the man I was before. And must my name until I die be no more than an alibi? Must I lie? How can I ever face my fellow men? How can I ever face myself again? My soul belongs to God, I know. I made that bargain long ago. He gave me hope when hope was gone. He gave me strength to journey on. Who am I? Who am I?
Jean Valjean.
This notion of singing through an entire musical on screen, and in these ultra close-ups, why that approach and that decision?
I wanted the audience to settle into the film and go with the story and the characters as fast as possible. And I think it's tricky sometimes when you mix 50% dialogue, 50% singing, you know, because one moment you're in a dialogue movie, next moment they start singing, you're like, why are they singing this bit? And now they're speaking again, why are they speaking that bit? And I wanted to create a world like ours, but an alternate universe where people communicate through song. So it's exactly like us. We're sitting here chatting, but these people can generate melody and rhyme and express themselves from the bottom of their soul through song.
On my own, pretending he's beside me, all alone, I walk with him till morning. Without him, I feel his arms around me, And when I lose my way, I close my eyes, and he has found me.
As I watched it, when I finished watching, I thought, how did they mic this thing? Did they have mics all over the place? Were you
We
did
all
you
had
lavs?
we had mics, which got then erased out in post-production.
Oh,
so,
I see.
Yeah, so we had little earpiece in, so we could hear a piano that was, you know, just offset.
In another studio, yeah.
And then we had, you know, microphones here attached to our corset, to my corset, our corset.
The universal corset.
The universal corset.
I love him, but when the night is over.
How did King's Speech and John Adams prepare you for this scope?
I think John Adams gave me some preparation in terms of the kind of epic scale of Les Miserables, because John Adams covered a 50-year time span and went from, you know, America to Europe and back again, and had a huge cast of characters. And in a way, the King's Speech prepared me in terms of finding that confidence to just hold on an actor's face and know that if you have a brilliant actor, you don't have to cut away, because they can hold the screen and tell the story beautifully.
Now, prisoner 24601, your time is up and your parole's begun. You know what that means.
Yes, he's free.
No. Follow to the letter your itinerary. This badge of shame, you'll show it till you die. It warns you're a dangerous man.
I stole a loaf of bread. My sister's child was close to death.
You are an adoptive parent.
Yes.
Tell me how that experience governed the choices of this role. Did it affect at all the way you approached this role of Jean Valjean?
It's a good question. I forget that I'm an adoptive parent. I think the thing that Victor Hugo talks about and Tom Hooper really wanted to exacerbate in this story of Jean Valjean is that when he takes care of this young kid, who's an 8-year-old girl called Cosette, his heart completely opens up and he experiences love, unconditional love, for the first time in his life. Now, it's not the first time in my life I've experienced that, but when I adopted my kids, I can't imagine there being any difference between being an adoptive parent or biological parent. There is something about the open, trusting, loving souls, natural souls of kids that just demand that of you. And there's no doubt that for me, as a parent, playing Jean Valjean, particularly that second half, or if I think about that final scene, very easy for me to connect to those feelings.
Yeah, and you could feel it. I mean, there's a depth in your performance here that is just extraordinary.
Thanks.
Now, do you hear what they're saying out there?
No.
Do you hear the people say Academy Awards for Hugh Jackman? Do you hear that? You hear the buzz, Hugh.
Well, you got to make lyrics rhyme at least.
Well, I'll do it. Okay. Do you hear the Academy bringing awards to Hugh Jackman? Huh?
It's closer.
It's close enough.
Not too bad.
Okay.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to even get into that, but it's thrilling to have people love this movie musical. They don't get made very often. I feel very blessed to be part of it. It's an incredible role, but please, let's hope that Hollywood doesn't give up on making movie musicals.
Tomorrow you'll be worlds away.
Who was that girl?
Cosette.
And yet with you my world has started.
But he never saw me there.
To discuss Les Mis and all the films of the season, we're joined by Stephen GREYDANUS, the film critic for the National Catholic Register. Stephen, let's start with, what did you make of this film?
You know, I had a chance to see Les Mis on Broadway, and transposing it into the big screen where you can get really close to the performers as they sing makes it a very different experience.
Yep.
I'm glad for the chance to see it on the big screen. I think Hugh Jackman was really the perfect choice for Jean Valjean, not only because he just has the quality to play him as a human being, but because he has the chops as a singer.
Yeah.
The problem with casting him is once you cast him as Jean Valjean, who do you cast as Javert? You need somebody like Russell Crowe who's intimidating, and unfortunately Russell wasn't as up to the high notes
the vocals were a little lacking. But I have to say, people are always talking about a new evangelization.
Yes.
And ways to do that.
Yes.
Every bishop, priest, pastor, and cleric should be begging their people to go see this movie. It really is about the redemptive nature of man's redemptive quest. It's about the cross and embracing it and putting yourself aside for the sake of others.
There are many dimensions to the redemptive themes in the story. It starts off with an overtly religious redemptive theme, as we see Jean Valjean stealing from the church and then unexpectedly receiving this act of mercy from the bishop, who confirms his story to the policeman. Totally in accordance with Catholic social teaching, by the way, that you can help yourself to somebody else's property if you are in desperate enough need. So he goes on from there, and from that redemptive act, first he establishes himself as a respectable citizen, but then in his relationship with Cosette, he learns about sacrificially giving himself for another person. It's a very layered redemption, and we see how that initial act by the bishop cascades to the benefit of many other people.
I also love how they shot all of Jean Valjean's soliloquies and solos from above, so they're all almost pleased to God, and it really, for me, it very much changed the residual effect. I mean, I'd seen it repeatedly in London and in New York. I have to tell you, I don't particularly care for the piece on stage, but here I was struck. I mean, the music is beautiful, glorious, and these performances are spectacular.
You know, when something is this popular, I think it almost goes beyond do you like it or you not like it. You have to ask, what is it that it offers audiences? Why do people respond to it so powerfully? And I think that the religious themes are definitely part of that.
And I think Catholics and others will see those religious themes play out. They're beautifully done. You saw a connection between Les Miserables and Anna Karenina, a film which, quite honestly, let's be honest, it's an art house film that nobody's going to see. But go ahead.
Well, I hope that people do go to see it. And I think that if anybody's going to make it accessible, it's going to be Joe Wright and Keira Knightley, the director and star of Pride and Prejudice, fantastic adaptation from a few years ago. What they've done here, I mean, you're adapting one of the great Russian novels, Anna Karenina. It's been adapted many times for the screen, as has Les Mis. But what's different about these two films is that they both have a theatrical quality that I think makes them more accessible. This is the first time that Les Mis has been presented as a musical on screen. It's been adapted dramatically many other times, and Anna Karenina has been adapted for the screen many times. But what Joe Wright has done here is to present it using an all-British cast, but starting out as a stage play. So we see actors on the stage and the camera is moving and sweeping among them, and then the action kind of moves out into the theater, up into the fly rigging, and then finally out onto the tundra. And what this does is it helps to compress the story. It helps to kind of bridge the gap between us and Tolstoy, and it includes more of the storylines as a result. This is a film that is morally very serious without being moralizing. It's got a lot about marriage, about fidelity, about many moral themes.
Many more people are going to see The Hobbit than will see Anna Karenina. So let's talk about that in our final moments here. What did you make of it? Peter Jackson has stretched a tiny children's book into 3 epic films. Is that fair?
Well, see, this is the thing. Everybody wants to know, does The Hobbit stack up to The Lord of the Rings? And The Hobbit was never meant to stack up to The Lord of the Rings. You know, after he finished writing The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien went back to The Hobbit and tried to revise it to bring it tonally into line with The Lord of the Rings. And people said, no, it's not The Hobbit anymore. Peter Jackson and company wanted to make The Hobbit first when they started out on this project 15 years ago, but the film rights weren't available, and unfortunately, we'll never get to know what their Hobbit would have looked like if they weren't trying, in a sense, to overwhelm the Hobbit. And we get scenes in the fight in Goblin Town where he's clearly trying to outdo the Mines of Moria sequence. The action is much bigger, but the stakes are much smaller, and you don't connect with the characters in the same way.
It's draggy. Let's face it. These scenes go on forever. Tell me about the 48 per second frame that we're seeing. 48 frames per second.
In terms of the production value and the set design and everything, you feel like you're right back in Middle-earth, but the look of the film is very different because Peter Jackson has shot it at twice the normal frame rate. This gives you a clarity with some of those sweeping camera movements where you don't see blurriness, but it almost makes the effect too real. You're very aware, I think, of watching actors in
front of
costumes. On sets with props, it doesn't create a sense of characters within a world. I have to say, I frankly was disappointed by the film. There are some things that it gets right, though, including that most important moment, the moment of grace, when Frodo, or when Bilbo, sorry, has Gollum at his mercy, and he makes another call, which figures so importantly in the moral themes in the trilogy.
Yeah, no, I loved the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think my kids and I have watched all whatever it is, 9 hours of the extended cuts.
Yes.
But this is like going to the dentist. It went on and on.
Well, the problem is that it's all
been done in one
highlights
movie.
and bombast. There's none of the quiet moments of great, other than that scene with Gollum. There are none of the quiet little vignettes that we see in Middle-earth, in Hobbiton in the first film.
We are going to do an after show with Stephen, and you can find that. I'll tweet it, I'll Facebook it, so and you can put it on your site as well. So we're going to do an after show looking at some of the other films. What would you absolutely recommend people to see quickly?
Go to Netflix Instant and watch The Kid with the Bike from the Dardenne brothers. It is the year's best film.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, an odd and good choice. To read Stephen GREYDANUS' blog at the National Catholic Register, visit ncregister.com. You can also follow Stephen GREYDANUS' reviews at the Decent Film Guide at decentfilms.com. Les Miserables opens nationwide here in the U.S. on Christmas Day at theaters near you. Be sure to see it. Well, that is all the time we have. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site. I've gotten so many emails of late. You'll notice I launched a little, I guess it's a contest last week, about my audiobook of the Mother Angelica biography. I decided to spread a few more around this Christmas. I narrated it myself. I do all the voices. It's a fun way to experience the book. If you'd like a chance to get a copy, and I'm going to award them between now and before Christmas, of the Mother Angelica audiobook, follow me on Twitter and send a tweet at Raymond Arroyo. Put Mother Angelica audiobook in the tweet. I will pick winners at random and notify you soon via direct message. Next week, we'll bring you my favorite show of the year, the 2012 World Over Christmas Special, featuring new musical performances from Jose Feliciano, the Grammy Award winner, and all your favorites from Christmases past. Now, until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Merry Christmas. Bye now.